The sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Timber Creek as Florence Palmer stumbled off the stagecoach, her once fine dress stained with the evidence of her 3-day journey. She clutched a worn carpetbag in one hand and a letter of recommendation in the other, both items representing the sum total of her worldly possessions. At 22, with nowhere else to turn after her family's Boston home had been seized by creditors, she had come west seeking the only employment her limited skills could secure, housekeeping for a rancher she'd never met. Florence tucked a loose strand of auburn hair behind her ear and squinted at the rough-hewn buildings lining the street. Montana Territory, 1878, was a far cry from the refined society she'd left behind. The letter in her hand was addressed to Lucas Reeves, owner of the Crooked R Ranch, and, if the stagecoach driver's gossip was accurate, a widower with a young daughter. "Miss, you'd be the new housekeeper for the Reeves place?" A boy of about 14 approached, his freckled face curious beneath his floppy hat. "Yes," Florence replied, summoning her most dignified tone despite her disheveled appearance. "I'm looking for Mr. Reeves." "He's at the general store. I'm Tommy. I help out at his ranch sometimes. He asked me to watch for you." The boy gestured toward a building at the far end of the street. "I can take you there, madam." Florence nodded gratefully and followed Tommy through the busy street, conscious of the curious glances from townspeople. In Boston, she had been merely one face among thousands, but here in Timber Creek, she was clearly a novel. The general store's bell jingled as Tommy pushed open the door. "Mr. Reeves, your new housekeeper's here." Florence's first impression of Lucas Reeves was of sheer size. Standing well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that nearly filled the narrow aisle between shelves, he turned with a questioning look that changed to assessment as his eyes found her. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he was in his early 30s. Dark hair curled from beneath his hat, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a mouth that neither smiled nor frowned. "Miss Palmer?" His voice was deep but not unfriendly. Florence straightened her spine. "Yes, sir. Florence Palmer, from Boston." Lucas Reeves studied her for a long moment, taking in her travel-stained dress and the exhaustion she couldn't quite hide. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded. "Welcome to Timber Creek. Got a few more supplies to load, then we'll head to the ranch." He turned back to the shopkeeper. "Add some of that peppermint candy, Joe. Sadie will want to welcome our guest proper." The name stirred Florence's curiosity. "Sadie is your daughter, Mr. Reeves?" A softer expression crossed his face. "Yes, madam. 6 years old and the boss of the Crooked R." He picked up his parcels. "She's been talking of nothing else but your arrival for weeks." "I hope I won't disappoint her," Florence said, suddenly nervous. Children had never figured prominently in her life. Lucas's gaze met hers directly. "Miss Palmer, I should be clear about what you're getting into. The ranch is 10 miles out of town. It's good land, but the house isn't fancy. Sadie's mother passed 3 years ago, and it's been just the two of us and whatever cowhands I employ for the season. It's hard country." Florence lifted her chin. "Mr. Reeves, I appreciate your candor. I may have been raised in the city, but I'm prepared to work hard and learn quickly. My circumstances have changed dramatically, but my determination hasn't." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Fair enough. Let's get you home then." He offered to take her carpetbag, which she relinquished with a grateful nod. Outside, Lucas helped her into a wagon loaded with supplies. The wooden seat was hard, but after the jolting stagecoach, almost anything felt comfortable to Florence. As they pulled away from town, she allowed herself to study her new employer surreptitiously. His hands were large but sure on the reins, his profile strong against the late afternoon sun. He was handsome in a rugged way that would never have turned heads in Boston drawing rooms, but seemed perfectly suited to this wild landscape. "Tell me about your daughter," Florence said, breaking the silence. Lucas's expression softened immediately. "Sadie's a wonder, smart as a whip, stubborn as her mother was. She can already read better than some of my hands. Loves stories about far-off places." He glanced at Florence. "She's excited to meet someone from the East. Thinks you'll be full of fancy tales." "I'll do my best not to disappoint her," Florence said. "Though I should warn you, my life hasn't been particularly adventurous." "Coming all the way out here alone seems pretty adventurous to me," Lucas remarked. Florence looked away, unwilling to discuss the desperate circumstances that had led to her journey. Necessity often masquerades as courage, Mr. Reeves. He nodded, seeming to understand her reluctance. Call me Lucas. Mr. Reeves makes me feel like my father. As they traveled, the landscape opened up before them, rolling grasslands dotted with stands of pine, and in the distance, the looming silhouettes of mountains. It was beautiful in a raw, untamed way that both frightened and exhilarated Florence. There it is, Lucas said eventually, pointing toward a cluster of buildings nestled against a backdrop of hills. The Crooked R. Florence took in the sight with interest. The main house was larger than she'd expected, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney. A barn, bunkhouse, and several corrals surrounded it, and in the distance cattle grazed on the hillsides. It wasn't grand by any measure, but it was well kept and surrounded by breathtaking scenery. As they approached, a small figure burst from the house and ran toward the wagon, pigtails flying. "Pa! Pa! Is she here?" The little girl skidded to a stop as Lucas reined in the horses. "Sadie, mind your manners," Lucas admonished gently, though his eyes crinkled with affection. "Miss Palmer, this is my daughter." Sadie Reeves had her father's dark hair and a spattering of freckles across her nose. She regarded Florence with curious blue eyes, her head tilted like a bird's. "Hello, Sadie," Florence said, suddenly nervous. "It's very nice to meet you." To her surprise, the child moved closer, studying her intently. Then, without warning, Sadie leaned in and took a deep breath. "Pa," she said, with the certainty only a child could muster. "She smells like home, like Ma's fancy soap and books and good things. Keep her, Pa." Florence felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, but Lucas just laughed a rich, unexpected sound. "Sadie, people aren't like stray puppies. We don't just decide to keep them." He helped Florence down from the wagon. "Miss Palmer is here to work for us, to help keep the house." Sadie considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Well, I still think we should keep her." She reached for Florence's hand. "Come see your room. I helped Pa clean it special." As Florence allowed herself to be led toward the house, she caught Lucas watching them, an unreadable expression on his face. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt a small flicker of hope. Perhaps here, in this wild place, she might find something worth keeping too. The inside of the house surprised Florence. Though simple, it was clean and well organized, with sturdy furniture and colorful woven rugs on the pine floors. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, with a rocking chair and small sofa arranged before it. Bookshelves lined one wall, far more books than she'd expected to find in a frontier home. "Pa reads to me every night," Sadie explained, following Florence's gaze. "We're reading Treasure Island now. Do you like stories?" "Very much," Florence replied, genuinely warming to the child. "Perhaps I could read to you sometimes too?" Sadie's face lit up. "Oh yes, please." She tugged Florence toward a hallway. "Your room is this way. It has a window that looks at the mountains." The bedroom was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed covered by a colorful quilt, a washstand with pitcher and bowl, and a simple chest of drawers. Fresh wildflowers stood in a jar on the windowsill, and the promised view of mountains was indeed spectacular. "It's lovely, Sadie. Thank you for helping prepare it." "I picked the flowers myself," the child said proudly. "Pa said a lady would like flowers." Florence smiled. Your pa was right. Lucas appeared in the doorway, Florence's carpetbag in hand. "Giving the grand tour, Sadie girl? Miss Palmer likes her room, Pa, and she's going to read to me sometimes." "Is that so?" Lucas raised an eyebrow at Florence. "Well, that's mighty kind of her." He set the bag down. "I'll let you get settled. Supper's in an hour. Nothing fancy, just beans and biscuits tonight." "That sounds perfect," Florence assured him. After days of irregular meals at stagecoach stops, home-cooked food of any sort would be welcome. When Lucas and Sadie had gone, Florence sank onto the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of the change in her circumstances. 3 weeks ago, she had been Florence Palmer, daughter of Edward Palmer, respected Boston businessman. Then had come the shocking revelations: her father's gambling debts, the business partners he'd defrauded, his suicide when exposure seemed inevitable. The house and everything in it had been seized, leaving Florence with nothing but her mother's few personal items, and the brutal knowledge that her comfortable life had been built on deception. The advertisement seeking a housekeeper in Montana Territory had been a desperate chance, but her only one. Now, here she was, employed by a man she'd just met, tasked with caring for his home and child in a place so different from everything she'd known that it might as well have been another world. Florence unpacked her meager belongings, 3 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a nightgown, her mother's hairbrush, and a small framed photograph of her parents taken before her mother's death a decade earlier. At the bottom of the bag lay her most precious possession, her mother's journal, filled with poetry and observations about life. Florence placed it carefully in the drawer of the bedside table. After washing the travel dust from her face and hands, she changed into her cleanest dress, a serviceable blue cotton that had once been her second-best day dress, but now represented the height of her wardrobe. She plaited her hair and pinned it up neatly, determined to make a respectable impression in her new role. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of baking biscuits when Florence entered. Lucas stood at the stove, stirring a pot of beans, while Sadie carefully set the table. "Can I help?" Florence asked. Lucas looked up, seeming surprised to find her there. "No need. First night and all. You can learn the ropes tomorrow. Please, I'd prefer to earn my keep from the start." Florence moved to take the wooden spoon from him. "I may not be experienced with ranch cooking, but I can certainly stir beans." Their fingers brushed as he relinquished the spoon, and Florence felt an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. Lucas stepped back, watching as she took over. "Where did you learn to cook, Miss Palmer?" he asked, leaning against the counter. Florence concentrated on the bubbling pot. "I observed our cook in Boston, though I wasn't permitted in the kitchen often." She hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I should tell you that my domestic skills are limited. We had servants for most tasks, but I'm a quick study, and I'm not afraid of hard work." Lucas nodded. "Sadie and I don't need fancy. Just clean and orderly is fine." He reached past her to remove the biscuits from the oven, his arm brushing her shoulder. "Tomorrow, I'll show you around the place, get you acquainted with how things run." Supper was a simple affair, but the food was hearty and filling. Sadie chattered happily throughout the meal, telling Florence about her pony, her lessons, and the new calf that had been born the previous week. Lucas said little, but Florence noticed how attentively he listened to his daughter, his face softening whenever she spoke. "Pa says I can have a puppy when the right one comes along," Sadie informed Florence. "Do you like dogs, Miss Palmer?" "I do, though I've never had one of my own," Florence replied. "In the city we didn't have much space for pets." Sadie looked horrified. "No space for dogs? But what did you do for company?" Florence smiled. "We had neighbors very close by, and I had books." She glanced at Lucas. "Your father mentioned you enjoy reading. What's your favorite story?" As Sadie launched into an enthusiastic description of several beloved tales, Florence noticed Lucas watching her. When their eyes met, he didn't look away, and something in his steady gaze made her heart beat a little faster. After supper, Florence insisted on cleaning up, despite Lucas's protests. "You need to rest after your journey," he argued. "Mr. Reeves, Lucas," she corrected herself. "I've come here to work, not to be waited upon. Please allow me to do the job you've hired me for." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but Sadie and I will help. We've managed on our own this long." As they worked together, Florence washing, Lucas drying, and Sadie carefully putting away the clean dishes, Florence felt a curious sense of rightness. Despite the strangeness of her surroundings and the uncertainty of her future, this simple domestic task performed together felt comforting. Later, she sat in the main room, mending a tear in Sadie's pinafore, while Lucas read aloud from Treasure Island. The child was curled against her father's side, her eyes wide with excitement at the adventure tale. The domesticity of the scene made Florence's throat tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. When Sadie began to yawn, Lucas closed the book. "Bedtime, pumpkin. Say goodnight to Miss Palmer." To Florence's surprise, Sadie scrambled over and threw her arms around her neck. "Good night, Miss Palmer. I'm glad you came to live with us." Florence hugged the child, touched by her easy affection. "Good night, Sadie. Sleep well." As Lucas carried his daughter to bed, Florence sat looking into the fire, pondering the strange turn her life had taken. She had come west, expecting hardship and loneliness, a difficult but necessary way to survive. She hadn't expected a precocious child's welcome or the curious sense of connection she already felt to this household. When Lucas returned, he sat in the chair opposite her, stretching his long legs toward the fire. "She's taken a shine to you," he said. "Sadie doesn't usually warm up to folks so quick." "She's a delightful child," Florence replied honestly. "You've done a fine job raising her on your own." Lucas's expression grew more serious. "I do my best, but a girl needs a woman's influence. That's partly why I advertised for a housekeeper. The place has been lacking a feminine touch since Marie passed." "How did your wife die, if you don't mind my asking?" "Fever," Lucas said simply. "Came on sudden during a hard winter. Doctor couldn't get through from town in time." He stared into the fire. "Sadie was just 3, young enough that her memories of her mother are fading, which breaks my heart some days." "I'm sorry," Florence said softly. "I lost my mother when I was 12. It's a difficult thing for a child." Lucas nodded. "What about your father? The agency said you had no family." Florence tensed, unsure how much to reveal. "He died recently. There was no one else." Something in her tone must have communicated her reluctance to elaborate. Because Lucas didn't press further. Instead, he changed the subject. "Tomorrow I'll show you around the ranch. It's not as grand as some, but we do all right. 40 head of cattle, some horses, chickens, and a vegetable garden that could use a woman's touch." He glanced at her. "Have you ever gardened, Miss Palmer?" "Florence, please," she said. "And yes, I maintained a small herb garden at home. Nothing substantial, but I understand the basic principles." "Good." Lucas stood, towering over her in the firelight. "We rise early here with the sun. I'll have coffee ready when you come down." "That won't be necessary," Florence protested. "Making coffee is certainly part of my duties." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Let's call it a welcome gift then, first day and all." He moved toward the hallway, then paused. "Florence?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you're here too." With that, he was gone, leaving her alone with the crackling fire and the strange warm feeling that had settled in her chest. In her small room, as Florence prepared for bed, she reflected on the day's events. Lucas Reeves was not what she had expected. His rugged exterior concealed a gentle nature, at least where his daughter was concerned. And Sadie sweet. Forthright Sadie had welcomed her with open arms. As she drifted toward sleep, Florence found herself thinking of Lucas's strong hands carefully braiding his daughter's hair, of his deep voice reading adventure stories, of the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Dangerous thoughts for a woman in her position, she knew. She was here as an employee, nothing more. And yet, as sleep claimed her, it was his face she saw last. True to his word, Lucas had coffee brewing when Florence came downstairs just after dawn the next morning. She had dressed in her simplest gown, with her hair tightly braided and pinned, ready for whatever tasks the day might bring. "Morning," Lucas greeted her, pushing a steaming mug across the table. "Sleep well?" "Very, thank you." Florence accepted the coffee gratefully. "The mountain air must agree with me." Lucas nodded, watching as she took her first sip. "It's strong, ranch coffee." "It's perfect," she assured him, though in truth it was far stronger than she was accustomed to. "Is Sadie still sleeping?" "She'll be down soon. Early riser, that one." He gestured to a piece of paper on the table. "Made a list of the regular chores. Figured it might help you get your bearings." Florence examined the list off laundry. Cooking, cleaning, tending the garden, gathering eggs. Normal household tasks, but in this environment, each would present new challenges. "This seems manageable," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I'll do my best." "That's all anyone can ask." Lucas refilled his own mug. "There's something else we should discuss, your pay." Florence nodded, relieved he had broached the topic. "The agency mentioned a monthly wage, but I wasn't sure of the details." $10 a month plus room and board," Lucas said. "Paid at the end of each month, if that's agreeable." It was less than she might have earned in Boston, but with no expenses for food or lodging, it seemed fair. "Yes, that will be fine." "Good." Lucas seemed relieved. "And Sundays are yours to do as you please. We attend church in town when weather permits, but you're welcome to stay here if you prefer." The thoughtfulness of this arrangement touched Florence. "Thank you. I would like to attend church when possible." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of small feet thundering down the stairs, and then Sadie burst into the kitchen, her hair a wild tangle around her face. "Miss Palmer, you're really still here!" she exclaimed, as if half expecting Florence to have vanished in the night. Florence laughed. "Of course I am. Where else would I be?" "I thought maybe I dreamed you," Sadie admitted, climbing onto a chair. "Sometimes I dream about having a ma again." The innocent comment created a moment of the pained silence. Lucas busied himself at the stove, his back to them, while Florence searched for an appropriate response. "Well, I'm not a dream," she said gently. "And while I'm not your mother, I am very happy to be here with you and your father." Sadie nodded, apparently satisfied. "Can you braid my hair like you do yours?" "Pa tries, but he's not very good at it." "I heard that," Lucas said, turning with a mock frown that made Sadie giggle. "It's true, Pa. You make lumpy braids." Florence bit back a smile. "I would be happy to braid your hair, Sadie. After breakfast, perhaps?" The morning passed in a flurry of activity as Florence began to learn the rhythms of ranch life. After braiding Sadie's hair into neat plaits, she accompanied Lucas on a tour of the property. The ranch house stood at the center of the operation, with the barn, chicken coop, and vegetable garden nearby. Beyond stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed under the watchful eyes of two cowboys Lucas introduced as Hank and Joe. "Miss Palmer's our new housekeeper," Lucas explained to the men, who tipped their hats respectfully. "Pleasure, madam," said Hank, the older of the two. "The boss finally got tired of his own cooking, I reckon." Lucas gave him a good-natured glare. "Watch it, or you'll be eating your own cooking instead of sharing our table." Florence learned that the cowboys typically took their midday meal in the bunkhouse, but joined the family for breakfast and supper. It would mean cooking for 4 adults and a child, most days a daunting prospect given her limited experience, but she was determined to succeed. The vegetable garden proved to be in better shape than Lucas had implied, with neat rows of potatoes, beans, carrots, and other hardy vegetables. A small herb section contained rosemary, thyme, and mint. "Marie started this," Lucas explained, his voice softening as it always did when he mentioned his late wife. "I've kept it up as best I could, but I don't have her touch with growing things." Florence knelt to pull a weed from between the carrot rows. "It's a lovely garden. With a little attention, it will thrive." As they walked back toward the house, Sadie running ahead to check on her chickens, Lucas cleared his throat. "I should mention we get supplies from town once a month. Next trip is in 2 weeks. If there's anything particular you need, let me know before then." Florence thought of her limited wardrobe. "Thank you. I may need some fabric. My dresses aren't really suited to ranch work." Lucas's eyes traveled briefly over her city-made gown, and Florence felt suddenly self-conscious of how impractical it was for her new life. "Anything you need?" he said simply. "Put it on the ranch account at the general store, within reason, of course." "Of course," Florence agreed quickly. "I won't take advantage of your generosity." Something flickered in his eyes. "Didn't think you would." He gestured toward the house. "I'll leave you to get acquainted with the kitchen. Call if you need anything. I'll be mending fence in the north pasture most of the day." Left alone in the house with Sadie, Florence rolled up her sleeves and set to work. She began with an inventory of the kitchen, familiarizing herself with the stores of flour, sugar, coffee, and preserved foods that would form the basis of meals until the garden produced fresh vegetables. The pantry was well stocked but simply organized, reflecting a bachelor's practical approach to housekeeping. Sadie proved to be an eager helper, showing Florence where things were kept and explaining her father's cooking methods with the serious air of someone much older than 6. "Pa makes biscuits on Sundays," she informed Florence, "and flapjacks when we have maple syrup. He burns them sometimes." Florence smiled. "Does he? Well, perhaps I can try my hand at flapjacks soon." "Do you know stories about Boston?" Sadie asked, perched on a kitchen chair while Florence prepared a simple stew for supper. "Pa says it's a big city with lots of fancy buildings." "It is," Florence confirmed, chopping carrots. "There are beautiful parks and a harbor where ships come from all over the world. And in winter, sometimes children go skating on the frozen ponds." Sadie's eyes widened. "Can you skate, Miss Palmer?" "I can," Florence admitted, remembering winter afternoons gliding across the public gardens pond in her former life. Though I haven't done so in some time. Could you teach me? We have a pond that freezes, but Pa doesn't know how to skate. If your father approves, I'd be happy to. Florence found herself warming to the child's enthusiasm. What else would you like to know about Boston? For the next hour, as Florence prepared the evening meal, Sadie peppered her with questions about city life, particularly fascinated by descriptions of theater performances and the grand houses along Beacon Hill. Did you live in a grand house? Sadie asked innocently. Florence's hand stilled on the dough she was kneading for bread. I did once, she said quietly. But things change, Sadie. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. The child considered this with surprising solemnity. Like when Mama died, that was an unexpected turn. Florence's heart twisted. Yes, exactly like that. I'm very sorry about your mother. Sadie nodded. Pa says she's watching over us from heaven. Do you think that's true? I do, Florence said, meaning it. I think those who love us never really leave us. Sadie hopped down from her chair and, to Florence's surprise, wrapped her arms around Florence's waist, pressing her face against her apron. I'm glad you came here, she mumbled. Even if it was an unexpected turn for you. Florence blinked back sudden tears as she hugged the child. So am I, Sadie. So am I. By the time Lucas returned from his work, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of fresh bread and beef stew. Florence had managed to clean most of the main floor of the house as well, dusting surfaces that clearly hadn't received attention in some time, and arranging the bookshelves in a more orderly fashion. Lucas paused in the doorway, taking in the transformed space. Smells like heaven in here, he said, removing his hat. His hair was damp with sweat, his face streaked with dirt from the day's labor. Wash up, Pa, Sadie called from where she was carefully setting the table. Miss Palmer made real bread, not the hard kind you make. Lucas raised an eyebrow at Florence. High praise indeed. She's been a wonderful helper, Florence said, feeling oddly shy under his appreciative gaze. Supper will be ready once Hank and Joe arrive. I'll get cleaned up, Lucas said, then hesitated. You've done a lot today. The place already looks different. It's my job, Florence reminded him, though she was pleased by his notice. Still. Thank you. With that, he disappeared down the hall toward his room. Supper that evening was a livelier affair than the previous night. Hank and Joe joined them, both men clearly appreciative of Florence's cooking. They regaled the table with tales of a troublesome heifer that had escaped through the fence Lucas had been repairing, leading them on a chase across the hills. If the boss had fixed that fence properly in the first place, we wouldn't have spent half the day tracking the fool animal, Hank teased, winking at Florence. If my hands did their job watching the herd, they might have noticed the cow pushing through before she got loose, Lucas retorted good-naturedly. Florence found herself enjoying the easy camaraderie among them. In her father's house, meals had been formal affairs, with conversation limited to proper topics and servants hovering nearby. Here, elbows rested on the table, laughter flowed freely, and no one stood on ceremony. After the Cowboys had returned to the bunkhouse and Sadie had been tucked into bed, Florence found herself alone with Lucas again. She was wiping down the kitchen table when he returned from putting his daughter to bed. She asked for you to read to her tomorrow night, he said, leaning against the doorframe. Hope that's all right. Of course, Florence replied, wringing out her cloth. I'd be happy to. Lucas watched her for a moment. You've made quite an impression on her. She doesn't usually take to people so quickly. She's a special child, Florence said sincerely. You should be very proud. I am. Lucas moved into the kitchen, taking a seat at the freshly wiped table. She's the best thing I ever did. He hesitated, then added, Her mother would be pleased to see how she's growing. Florence hung the cloth to dry. You must miss your wife very much. Lucas's face grew thoughtful. I do. Marie was a good woman, strong, kind. The sort of partner a man needs out here. He looked up at Florence. What about you? Ever been married? No, Florence admitted. There were expectations in Boston, suitable matches, but nothing ever felt right. She didn't add that most of those suitable matches had evaporated when her father's fraudulent activities had been exposed. Their loss, Lucas said simply, rising from the table. I should let you get some rest. You've worked hard today. "I've enjoyed it," Florence said, surprised to realize it was true. Despite the physical demands of her new role, there was satisfaction in seeing the immediate results of her labor: clean floors, fresh bread, an orderly home. "Good night, then," Lucas said, moving toward the door. He paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "Florence?" "Yes." "I'm glad Sadie told me to keep you." Before she could formulate a response, he was gone, leaving her with a curious, fluttering sensation in her chest that had no place in a housekeeper's practical heart. The days fell into a rhythm as spring advanced toward summer. Florence rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the household, then spent her mornings on household chores, laundry on Mondays, baking on Tuesdays, thorough cleaning on Wednesdays, and so on. Afternoons often found her in the garden, which flourished under her care, producing an abundance of vegetables that she preserved for the coming winter. Sadie became her shadow whenever the child wasn't engaged in the lessons Lucas insisted upon. Florence found herself expanding these educational efforts, teaching Sadie not only reading and basic arithmetic, but also simple French phrases and piano on the small, slightly out-of-tune instrument in the parlor that had belonged to Marie. "You play beautifully," Lucas commented one evening, finding Florence at the piano after Sadie had gone to bed. Florence's fingers stilled on the keys. "It's been some time since I had regular practice. I'm quite rusty." "Sounds perfect to me." He sat beside her on the bench, the sudden proximity making her heart race. "Would you teach me something simple? Marie always wanted me to learn, but I never made the time." "Of course," Florence agreed, hyper-aware of his thigh pressed against hers on the narrow bench. She positioned his large, calloused hands on the keys, guiding him through a basic scale. His fingers were clumsy at first, but he was a quick study, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Like this?" he asked, repeating the pattern she'd shown him. "Yes, exactly." Florence smiled at his accomplishment. "You're a natural." Lucas laughed. "Hardly, but I like having you teach me." His eyes met hers, and for a breathless moment, Florence thought he might say something more. Instead, he stood abruptly. "Getting late. We should both turn in." These moments of connection became more frequent as the weeks passed, a shared smile over Sadie's antics, their hands brushing as they worked together in the garden. Conversations that stretched long into the evening after Sadie was asleep. Florence found herself looking forward to these quiet times with Lucas, even as she reminded herself that he was her employer and nothing more could come of her growing feelings. In early June, a letter arrived that shattered the peaceful routine Florence had established. It was from Mr. Winters, her father's former business partner in Boston, and it contained a thinly veiled threat. He knew where she was, he wrote, and unless she returned east to address certain financial matters related to her father's dealings, he would be forced to inform the good people of Timber Creek about the criminals she was harboring in their midst. Florence read the letter with trembling hands, then sank onto her bed, overwhelmed by fear and shame. She had known this day might come, that her father's misdeeds would eventually find her, even in this remote place. What she hadn't anticipated was how deeply the prospect of leaving the Crooked R would hurt. In the weeks since her arrival, this place had become more than a refuge. It had become home. Sadie's affection, Lucas's quiet strength, even the rhythms of ranch life had woven themselves into the fabric of her being. The thought of leaving, of returning to face the scandal and possible legal consequences of her father's actions was almost unbearable. But the alternative was worse. If Mr. Winters followed through on his threat, the scandal would follow her here. Lucas and Sadie would be tainted by association, subjected to the gossip and judgment of the community. Florence couldn't bear the thought of bringing such pain to people who had shown her nothing but kindness. That evening, as she served supper, Florence was uncharacteristically quiet. Lucas noticed, his eyes following her with concern as she moved around the kitchen. "Everything all right?" he asked when Sadie had left the table to fetch the drawing she wanted to show Florence. "Yes, of course," Florence lied, avoiding his gaze. "Just a bit tired today." Lucas didn't appear convinced, but before he could press further, Sadie returned, proudly displaying her artwork. The moment passed, but throughout the evening, Florence felt Lucas watching her, as if trying to decipher the change in her demeanor. After Sadie was asleep, Florence made her decision. She would leave before Mr. Winters could make good on his threat. She would return to Boston, face whatever consequences awaited her there, and spare Lucas and Sadie the pain of learning the truth about her family's disgrace. With a heavy heart, she wrote a letter of resignation, explaining that urgent family matters required her immediate return east. It was vague but plausible, and she hoped Lucas would accept it without too many questions. She would leave it for him to find after she was gone, taking the weekly stagecoach from town the next day while he was working in the distant pastures. What Florence didn't account for was Sadie finding the letter first. The child had come to her room early the next morning, eager to show her a new bird's nest she'd discovered. Finding Florence packing her carpetbag, Sadie's curiosity had led her to the folded paper on the bedside table. "What's resignation mean?" Sadie asked, struggling with the unfamiliar word as she read the letter's heading. Florence whirled around, dismayed to find her letter in Sadie's hands. "Sadie, that's private. Please give it to me." But the child's quick eyes had already scanned enough of the contents to understand. "You're leaving?" Her voice rose in distress. "You can't leave. You belong here with us." "Sadie, please," Florence began, reaching for the letter, but the child darted away, tears already streaming down her face. "Pa!" Sadie shouted, running from the room. "Pa! Miss Palmer is trying to leave us." Florence hurried after her, heart pounding. This was exactly what she'd hoped to avoid, a painful emotional scene that would only make her departure harder. To her dismay, Lucas was just coming in from the barn, alerted by his daughter's cries. "What's all this?" he asked, kneeling to catch Sadie as she flew into his arms. "She's leaving! Look!" Sadie thrust the crumpled letter at him. "Tell her she can't go, Pa. Tell her she has to stay." Lucas's eyes met Florence's over his daughter's head. Confusion, and something that might have been hurt darkening his expression as he scanned the letter. "Sadie, go feed your chickens," he said quietly. "But, Pa, now, please." His tone brooked no argument. When the child had reluctantly gone, Lucas straightened, still holding Florence's letter. "You want to tell me what this is about?" Florence twisted her hands together. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for you to find out this way. I thought it would be easier if I just left." "Easier for who?" Lucas's voice had a hard edge she'd never heard before. "You've been here almost 2 months. Sadie adores you. The place runs better than it ever has. And you were just going to disappear without a word?" "I left the letter," Florence said weakly. "A letter." Lucas crumpled the paper in his fist. "That's cold comfort to a 6-year-old who's already lost one woman she loved." The implication that Sadie loved her, that she was somehow equivalent to the child's mother in her affections, hit Florence like a physical blow. "I never meant to hurt her, or you. That's why I thought it best to go quietly." "Why are you going at all?" Lucas demanded. "If it's the work, or the pay, or something I've done—" "No," Florence interrupted. "Nothing like that. It's—" She trailed off, unable to tell him the truth, but unwilling to manufacture more lies. Lucas stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. "Florence, whatever it is, we can sort it out. Just talk to me." The genuine concern in his voice nearly broke her resolve. For a wild moment, she considered telling him everything about her father's crimes, about Mr. Winters's threat, about her fear of bringing scandal to his door. But the thought of seeing disgust replace the warmth in his eyes was more than she could bear. "I can't," she whispered. "Please understand, it's better this way. For everyone." Lucas stared at her for a long moment, then nodded stiffly. "I see. Well, I won't keep you against your will." He turned away, his shoulders rigid with hurt. "I'll drive you to town whenever you're ready." "Thank you," Florence said, her voice barely audible. "I'll be ready within the hour." The ride to town was conducted in painful silence. Sadie had refused to say goodbye, locking herself in her room despite Lucas's gentle coaxing. The child's rejection was a knife in Florence's heart, but she told herself it was better this way. In time, Sadie would forget her. Find another motherly figure who didn't bring the shadow of scandal with her. Lucas spoke only once during the journey as the buildings of Timber Creek came into view. "If you change your mind," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, "there's a place for you at the Crooked R, always." Florence couldn't trust herself to speak, so she merely nodded, blinking back tears. At the stagecoach office, Lucas unloaded her carpetbag, his movements efficient but distant. Eastbound stage comes through at noon, he informed her. Should be about an hour. Thank you, Florence managed, for everything. These past weeks have been... Words failed her. Lucas finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. Been what, Florence? The question hung between them, weighted with all the things she couldn't say. How could she tell him that these weeks had been the happiest of her life? That she had found in his home not just employment, but belonging? That leaving him and Sadie felt like tearing out a piece of her heart? Important to me, she finished inadequately. I won't forget your kindness. Something flashed in Lucas's eyes, disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. Safe travels, then. He touched the brim of his hat in a formal gesture that broke her heart with its distance. Then he was gone, climbing back into the wagon without a backward glance. Florence watched him drive away, fighting the urge to call him back, to run after the wagon and tell him everything. Instead, she picked up her bag and entered the stagecoach office to purchase her ticket. The clerk looked up in surprise. Miss Palmer, isn't it? Heading back east? Thought you were settling in at the Reeves place. Change of plans, Florence said shortly, unwilling to invite further questions. Well, that's a shame. Folks were saying what a difference you'd made out there. Little Sadie looking so neat and happy, and the Reeves place all spruced up. The clerk shook his head. Lucas seemed different too, more like his old self before Marie passed. Less solitary-like. Each word was a fresh wound. Florence paid for her ticket and retreated to a bench outside to wait, trying to steel herself against regret. She was still sitting there, lost in thought, when the sheriff approached, a telegram in his hand. Miss Palmer, got a wire for you from Boston. He handed her the yellow paper. Hope it's not bad news. Florence thanked him automatically, her heart sinking as she unfolded the telegram. It was from her father's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a kind older man who had tried to help her after her father's suicide. Winters arrested. Stop fraud charges. Stop your name cleared. Stop no need to return. Stop letter follows. Stop Thompson. Florence read the words 3 times, hardly daring to believe them. Mr. Winters arrested? Her name cleared? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was in her hands. Whatever scheme Winters had been planning had apparently backfired, leaving him to face legal consequences instead of her. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by a surge of hope so powerful it made her dizzy. There was no reason to leave now, no threat hanging over her, no scandal about to break. She could return to the Crooked R, to Sadie's affection and Lucas's quiet strength. If they would still have her. The stagecoach rumbled into town, dust billowing around its wheels. The driver called for passengers to board. Florence stood, her ticket clutched in one hand, the telegram in the other. A choice lay before her: continue with her plan to return east and start anew somewhere else, or turn back to the life she'd begun to build here, with all its uncertainties and possibilities. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. Change my mind, she told the startled clerk as she returned her unused ticket. Is there someone who could take a message to the Crooked R? No need for that, came a familiar voice behind her. Florence turned to find Lucas standing there, his hat in his hands, an uncertain expression on his face. Lucas, she breathed. I thought you'd gone back to the ranch. Got as far as the edge of town, he admitted. Couldn't leave it like that. He gestured to the stagecoach, now loading the last passengers. You're not getting on? Florence shook her head, holding out the telegram. I received some unexpected news. Good news. As Lucas read it, she continued. I was leaving because I thought I had to protect you and Sadie from complications in my past. But it seems those complications have resolved themselves. Lucas looked up from the telegram, his expression clearing. So, you're staying in Timber Creek? If there's still a place for me at the Crooked R, Florence said, suddenly uncertain. I understand if my behavior has damaged your trust. Florence, Lucas interrupted, stepping closer. When I said there would always be a place for you, I meant it. But I need to know that you won't run at the first sign of trouble. Sadie's been hurt enough, and frankly, so have I. I promise, Florence said earnestly. I won't run again, and if you'll let me, I'd like to explain everything about my father, about why I felt I had to leave. No more secrets. Lucas studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. I'd like that. A smile began to curve his mouth. Sadie's going to be mighty pleased. She was planning to stow away on the stage to follow you east. Florence laughed, feeling lighter than she had in days. I should have known. She's as stubborn as her father. Speaking of stubborn, Lucas said, his expression growing more serious. There's something I should have said before you tried to leave. Something I've been wanting to say for weeks now. Florence's heart began to race. Yes? Lucas took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. When Sadie said you smelled like home that first day, I thought she was just being a fanciful child. But she was right. From the moment you arrived, the Crooked R started feeling like a home again, not just a place we lived. He drew a deep breath. I'm not good with fancy words, Florence. But I think I'm falling in love with you. And if you need time, or if you don't feel the same way, I understand. But I couldn't let you leave without telling you. Florence felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. Oh, Lucas, I've been fighting my feelings for you because I thought I had no right to them, that my past would only bring you pain. But the truth is, I fell in love with you and Sadie both weeks ago. You became my home when I thought I'd lost everything. Lucas's face transformed with hope and happiness. Heedless of the curious onlookers in the small town street, he drew her into his arms. Come home with me, Florence, for good this time. Instead of answering with words, Florence rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Lucas pulled her closer, his arms strong around her waist. When they finally parted, both breathless, Florence rested her forehead against his chest. Take me home, Lucas. The ride back to the ranch was as different from their earlier journey as night from day. Lucas held Florence's hand whenever the road allowed, and they talked freely, Florence finally unburdening herself of the painful story of her father's disgrace and suicide. He was a good man in many ways, she explained, but he made terrible choices, gambling away our fortune and then defrauding his partners to try to recover it. When it all came crashing down, he couldn't face the consequences. Lucas squeezed her hand. That must have been incredibly difficult for you. It was, Florence admitted. Not just losing him, but discovering that so much of what I thought I knew about our life was built on deception. The house, my education, our social position, all of it purchased with stolen money. That doesn't reflect on you, Lucas said firmly. You didn't know. No, but I benefited from it. And when everything was seized, I had nowhere to turn. No family, no friends willing to associate with Edward Palmer's daughter. Florence looked out at the rolling landscape. The advertisement for a housekeeper in Montana Territory seemed like divine providence, a chance to start fresh where no one knew my name or my shame. Lucas was quiet for a moment, processing her story. And when that Winters fellow threatened to expose you, you thought you had to run again. Yes, I couldn't bear the thought of bringing scandal to your door, of Sadie being ostracized because of me. Florence turned to him. Can you understand why I felt I had to leave? I can, Lucas said. I don't agree with your method, but I understand your motive. He gave her a sidelong glance. No more secrets between us, though. Whatever comes, we face it together. Deal? Deal, Florence agreed, warmth spreading through her at the implicit promise in his words, a future together. As they approached the ranch, Florence could see a small figure waiting on the porch, pacing back and forth with evident impatience. Seems Sadie's gotten over her sulk, Lucas observed with a chuckle. The moment the wagon pulled into the yard, Sadie flew down the steps and across the dirt, reaching them before Lucas had fully stopped the horses. Miss Palmer, you came back, she cried, her face alight with joy. I knew Pa would bring you back. I told him he had to. Florence climbed down from the wagon and knelt to embrace the child, holding her tightly. I'm so sorry I tried to leave, Sadie. That was a mistake. Can you forgive me? Sadie pulled back to look at her seriously. Only if you promise never to do it again. We need you here. I promise, Florence said solemnly. I'm not going anywhere. Sadie beamed, then looked up at her father, who had joined them. See, Pa? I told you she belongs with us. She smells like home. Lucas laughed, ruffling his daughter's hair. You were right all along, Pumpkin. He met Florence's eyes over Sadie's head, his gaze full of promise. She does belong here. That evening, after Sadie had been tucked into bed with extra stories and cuddles to reassure her that Florence was truly staying, Lucas and Florence sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him in a pose that felt both new and somehow familiar, as if they had always been meant to sit this way. "I've been thinking," Lucas said, his deep voice rumbling against her ear. Florence murmured, content in the warm circle of his embrace. "This arrangement, you being the housekeeper, it doesn't seem quite right anymore." Florence tensed slightly. "What do you mean?" Lucas turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I mean that I don't want you working for me, Florence. I want you beside me, as my wife, if you'll have me." Though they had declared their love earlier that day, the proposal still took Florence by surprise. "Lucas, are you certain? We've known each other such a short time. And my past is your past," he finished firmly. "And as for time, out here people don't have the luxury of long courtships. Life is too uncertain, too precious to waste." His eyes held hers steadily. "I know what I feel, Florence. I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want Sadie to have a mother again, and I want more children with you, if God blesses us that way." The vision his words conjured a future filled with love, family, belonging, brought tears to Florence's eyes. "Oh, Lucas, I want that too, so much." "Is that a yes?" he asked, a smile beginning to curve his mouth. Florence laughed through her tears. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." Lucas pulled her into his arms, his kiss a seal on their promise. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "We'll ride into town tomorrow, talk to the preacher. Unless you want a fancy wedding, we could wait, let you plan something special." "No," Florence interrupted, surprising herself with her certainty. "I don't need fancy. I just need you and Sadie. The sooner we can be a proper family, the happier I'll be." Lucas's smile was like the sunrise. "Next Sunday, then? Give folks time to hear the news, but not so long that I risk you changing your mind." "As if I could," Florence said, leaning into him again. "My heart is yours, Lucas Reeves. It has been since the moment your daughter declared I smelled like home." The news of their engagement spread through Timber Creek like wildfire. Florence found herself the center of attention when they visited town the next day, with women she'd barely met offering congratulations and advice, and men slapping Lucas on the back with knowing grins. It was overwhelming, but also heartwarming, to be so readily accepted into the community. The preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Thomas, agreed to perform the ceremony after Sunday services the following week. "Been waiting for Lucas to find happiness again," he told Florence with a twinkle in his eye. "The good Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing you all the way from Boston to fill the empty places in that home." Florence smiled, thinking of how close she had come to leaving, to missing this chance at happiness. "He does indeed, Reverend." The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. The ranch hands, delighted by the news, pitched in to help Lucas build an addition to the house, a larger bedroom for the newlyweds, and a proper sitting room where Florence could teach Sadie piano and receive guests. "It won't be finished by the wedding," Lucas apologized, showing Florence the progress. "But it should be done before winter sets in." "It's perfect," Florence assured him, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I don't need grand rooms, Lucas, just a home with you and Sadie." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, a perfect late June day. Florence dressed in her best gown, a simple blue dress that Lucas had insisted on buying for her at the general store, despite her protests that she didn't need new clothes. A bride should have something special, he'd argued, and the tenderness in his eyes had silenced her objections. Sadie appointed herself Florence's maid of honor, solemnly helping to arrange her hair and presenting her with a bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the meadow behind the house. "You look beautiful," the child declared when Florence was ready. "Like a princess in my storybooks." Florence knelt to hug her soon-to-be daughter. "And you look like the prettiest maid of honor any bride ever had." The church was full when they arrived, the entire community having turned out to witness the union of Lucas Reeves and his former housekeeper. As Florence walked down the aisle on Hank's arm, the old cowboy having volunteered to give her away, she saw only Lucas waiting for her at the altar, his face alight with love and promise. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. When they exchanged vows, Florence's voice trembled with emotion, and Lucas's strong hands held hers with gentle reverence. And when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas's kiss was both tender and possessive, acclaiming that Florence returned with equal fervor. The celebration afterward at the Crooked R was joyous and relaxed, with neighbors bringing food, music, and well wishes. As the afternoon waned into evening, Florence found a quiet moment with her new husband away from the festivities. "Happy, Mrs. Reeves?" Lucas asked, drawing her into his arms. "More than I ever imagined possible," Florence replied truthfully. "When I stepped off that stagecoach 3 months ago, I never dreamed I would find not just employment, but a home, a family, a love like this." Lucas brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. "You know what Sadie told me last night? She said God sent you to us because he knew we needed you. Out of the mouths of babes, eh?" Florence smiled, thinking of the remarkable child who had first welcomed her with the declaration that she smelled like home. "Sadie has wisdom beyond her years. She gets that from her mother," Lucas said, then clarified, "From you, Florence. You're her mother now, in all the ways that matter." The words filled Florence with a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "I'll do my best to deserve that honor." Lucas wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "You already have, my love. You already have." As twilight deepened into night, the guests gradually departed, leaving the new family to their first evening together. Sadie, exhausted from the excitement of the day, fell asleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. "Sweet dreams, my darling," Florence whispered, pressing a kiss to the child's forehead. "She's out like a light," Lucas observed from the doorway. "All that dancing wore her down." "It was a perfect day," Florence said, joining him. "I never thought I would have this. Lucas, a husband, a child, a home filled with love. And I never thought I'd find love again after Marie," Lucas admitted, leading her toward their bedroom. "But here we are, given a second chance at happiness." As they prepared for bed, there was a moment of shyness between them, this new intimacy a threshold neither had expected to cross again. But when Lucas finally took Florence in his arms, their bodies came together with a rightness that transcended uncertainty, their love expressed in whispered words and tender touches that bound them ever more closely together. Later, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Florence's head pillowed on Lucas's chest. She felt a contentment so deep it seemed to reach into her very soul. "What are you thinking?" Lucas murmured, stroking her hair. "I'm thinking that your daughter was right that very first day," Florence replied. "When she said I smelled like home." Lucas's arms tightened around her. "How so?" "Because this is home you, Sadie, this ranch. Everything I never knew I was looking for until I found it." She raised herself on one elbow to look into his face, barely visible in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Thank you for listening to your daughter's wisdom, for keeping me, even when I tried to leave." Lucas drew her down for a kiss that spoke of forever. "Best decision I ever made," he whispered against her lips. "Welcome home, Florence Reeves. Welcome home." 3 years later, Florence stood on the porch of the Crooked R, watching as Lucas taught their son to ride his first pony. Little Edward, named for Florence's father, in a gesture of forgiveness and healing, shrieked with delight as the gentle animal plodded around the corral, his father's strong hands keeping him secure in the saddle. Sadie, now 9 and growing into a beautiful young lady, sat beside Florence on the porch swing, both of them cradling cups of tea against the crisp autumn air. "Ma," Sadie said thoughtfully, using the name she had adopted for Florence shortly after the wedding. "Remember when I told Pa you smelled like home that first day?" Florence smiled, tucking a blanket around them both. "I do. It was quite the pronouncement from such a little girl." "I knew right away you belonged with us," Sadie said, with the certainty of childhood. "Even before Pa figured it out." "You're a very wise young lady," Florence agreed, putting an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Your father and I are blessed to have you." Sadie leaned into the embrace. "And I'm blessed to have you. Both of you." She glanced toward the corral, where Lucas was now lifting Edward from the pony, the little boy's laughter carrying across the yard. "And Eddie too, I guess, even if he is a pest sometimes." Florence laughed. "Brothers often are, or so I'm told." Their conversation was interrupted by Lucas approaching with Edward in his arms, the toddler's face flushed with excitement. "Did you see me, Mama? I rode the pony all by myself," Edward exclaimed, reaching for Florence. "I saw my brave boy," Florence assured him, taking him onto her lap. "You're going to be a fine horseman like your father." Lucas sat beside them, his arms stretching across the back of the swing to encompass his family. "Got a letter from town today," he said. "Remember that story you wrote about ranch life for that Eastern magazine? They want more." Said it gave their readers a real taste of the West. Florence's eyes widened. She had submitted the article on a whim, never expecting it to be published, let alone lead to more work. "That's wonderful. I can write about the apple harvest next, or perhaps the autumn cattle drive." "You should write about how you came to be here," Sadie suggested, "about how a city lady became a rancher's wife." "That's not a bad idea," Lucas agreed, his eyes warm as they met Florence's. "It's a good story. Love, second chances, a precocious child with a knack for recognizing where people belong." "Perhaps I will," Florence said, looking around at the family she had found in this unlikely place. "Though I doubt I could do justice to how truly miraculous it all feels." Lucas leaned over to kiss her softly. "Try anyway. Some stories need telling, even if words can't capture all of it." As the autumn sun slanted low across the ranch yard, gilding the scene in golden light, Florence silently thanked whatever providence had led her to this place, to these people who had become her world. From the ashes of her old life, a new one had risen richer, deeper, and filled with a love she had never dreamed possible. Later that night, with Edward asleep in his room and Sadie lost in a new book, Florence sat at the small desk in the sitting room Lucas had built for her, pen poised over paper. After a moment's thought, she began to write. It began with the words of a child. "She smells like home," the little girl had said on that spring day in 1878, studying the travel-worn stranger her father had brought to their Montana ranch. "Keep her, Pa." And against all odds, against all expectations, he had